Gita, and welcome to Practical Civics. So far, we've seen how Article 1 established the legislative branch, which creates new laws, and how Article 2 established the executive branch, which includes the president, who enforces the law. That brings us to the judicial branch, which is defined in the relatively short Article 3 of the Constitution. This branch's job is to interpret the laws and the Constitution, ensuring justice and settling disputes. While the president commands an extremely large executive branch, the judicial branch is ultimately led by the 9 justices on the Supreme Court, which means its power is not based on size, but in ultimate authority. The federal judiciary operates as a 3-tiered system. It was designed this way to help handle cases efficiently and ensure multiple layers of review. The first layer, where nearly all federal cases begin, is at the district court level. A single judge presides over these cases, and evidence is presented to a jury or, in some cases, a bench trial. If a party loses in district court, they can appeal to one of 13 circuit courts. Here, a panel of judges reviews the legal proceedings of the lower court. They don't retry the case or hear new evidence. Rather, they determine if the law was applied correctly. And then at the apex of this 3-tiered court system is the Supreme Court, which has 1 Chief Justice and 8 Associate Justices. The Supreme Court primarily acts as a final court of appeals, and they only select a very small number of cases that are referred to them to actually hear. A decision by the Supreme Court establishes a binding precedent for all courts across the nation. Article 3 of the Constitution states that federal judges hold their appointment during good behavior, which effectively means it's a lifetime appointment. And that is to ensure that justices are able to carry out their responsibilities free from political pressure or public opinion. The core power of the Supreme Court is judicial review, which isn't actually spelled out in Article 3 of the Constitution. This power was established through a landmark Supreme Court case in 1803 called Marbury versus Madison. Judicial review is the power of the courts to determine if an act by the legislative or executive branch is constitutional. If the Supreme Court finds that a law passed by the Congress or an action taken by the president is unconstitutional, they can then effectively nullify that action or that law in its entirety. You can think of it this way. The Congress writes the rule, the president enforces the rules, and the Supreme Court has the final say on what those rules actually mean and whether they follow the highest law of the land, which is the Constitution. So this is the ultimate check that the judiciary has on the other 2 branches. There are also checks and balances on the judiciary branch, though. The Congress can exercise a couple of checks on the court's power. First of all, Congress has power of the purse, so they control the structure and funding of the federal court system. Congress can technically alter the Supreme Court's size, although it rarely does, and also its funding. Congress also has the power of impeachment, not just for presidents, but also for federal judges, following the same procedure. The House can vote to impeach, and then the trial is carried out by the Senate. And finally, Congress can pass constitutional amendments. So if they disagree strongly with the Supreme Court ruling, the Congress can pass a new amendment to the Constitution, which effectively changes the law. The executive branch also has some power it exerts over the judiciary branch, the primary one being appointment. The president has the power to appoint all federal judges whenever there's a vacancy during their term. And critically, the executive branch is also the enforcement arm of the government, meaning that the executive branch is actually responsible for enforcing the court's rulings, which is a pretty important power. As President Andrew Jackson famously stated after a Supreme Court ruling he disagreed with, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him try to enforce it. And I think we're seeing that again with President Trump. When he disagrees with a ruling, he just drags his feet in terms of enforcing that. Because without the executive branch's cooperation, a court decision is meaningless unless Congress decides to exert their power over the president. So we've covered the 3 foundational articles of the Constitution that establish the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. This elaborate system of checks and balances where no single branch of the government can operate without the consent, review, or funding of the other branches is the brilliant engine that powers American government. It's what prevents tyranny and ensures that power in the United States remains decentralized. So that's the structure of the federal government. And in the next video, we'll dive into the crucial protections granted to all of us as citizens by the Bill of Rights.